Hello everyone. The official competitive Pokemon format, VGC, has an item clause. Of your 6 Pokemon team, no 2 can hold the same item. The most common reasoning you'll hear for this clause is that it encourages diversity and creativity. You can't just use the same powerful item over and over. You won't face a team spamming focus sashes or spamming powerful spread moves with multiple choice specs users. The item clause in VGC isn't controversial, it's generally well liked and just accepted as normal. Competitive singles, though, doesn't have the item clause, and this is somewhat controversial. VGC players trying singles are often shocked and horrified to hear that not only are teams and Terra types completely hidden, but you can run as many of one item as you want. It's not just VGC players, though. Particularly in recent generations, singles players have grown increasingly frustrated with archetypes that repeat certain items. Some hazard stack teams will use 3 or more heavy-duty boots. The ability to stack up hazards on your opponent's team while ignoring them yourself is very powerful, and these teams have been strong in both Generation 8 and 9. In general, the strength of hazards in singles makes heavy-duty boots arguably the best item in the game. It's often very easy to slap heavy-duty boots onto a Pokemon, and it will perform well. Even teams that don't utilize hazard stack still often use 2 or more Pokemon with heavy-duty boots. It's not just about boots, though. A new Generation 9 item, Booster Energy, has further inflamed this item clause debate. Many players consider getting a 1.5 times speed boost or a 1.3 times boost to another stat just too powerful, similar to a choice item but without the massive downside of being locked into one move. Of course, the Booster Energy is a one-time use item, but in Scarlet and Violet Overused, the main format for competitive singles, the metagame leans very much in the offensive direction. Offense and hyper-offense teams generate short games where the single-use property of Booster Energy isn't that big of a deal. It feels like an amazingly powerful item without significant drawbacks. The strength of the Booster Energy, combined with just how powerful many Paradox Pokemon are, frequently leads to teams that make use of 2 or more Booster Energies. Playing against Booster Energy spam can be very difficult due to the immediate power or speed these Paradox Pokemon have, and since many of these Booster Energy Pokemon are setup sweepers, which just enter the field, boost their stats once or twice, and attack until they die, the general consensus is that these teams don't take a lot of skill to play, making it even more disliked by the player base. Many in the community claim that an item clause would fix these problems. If only one Pokemon on your team can run heavy-duty boots, then boot spam teams won't be a thing anymore, and teams that formerly slapped boots on almost everything will have to be more creative. And Booster Energy spam teams will cease to exist. You'll still be able to use one, but nobody will have to deal with an onslaught of Booster Energy sweepers. Would an item clause really be a good idea, though? It's a question that many experienced players have given their thoughts on, and today I'm weighing in. I'll break down how I believe an item clause would affect the metagame, what it would help and hurt, and finally give my thoughts on whether it's a good idea or not. Let's start with the metagame analysis. For the most part, things wouldn't change much. A variety of items is just a good idea in team building already. Even if you can run the same item over and over, it's generally not smart to do so. It's good to have a Rocky Helmet Pokemon to punish contact moves, a heavy-duty boots Pokemon with removal to help against hazards, a choice band or specs Pokemon to break, a scarf Pokemon for speed control, a leftovers wall, and so on. Many teams obey the theoretical item clause without even trying, and those that don't typically only have 2 of one item, often leftovers or heavy-duty boots, and it's just not that big of a deal to replace them. You want to run leftovers in your Landorus, but it's already on your Kingambit? Well, just run Rocky Helmet on Landorus or Black Glass or Lumberry on Kingambit. Even if leftovers on both would be optimal, your team will be only very slightly worse. I should also note that this analysis is focused on Scarlet and Violet. In Generation 2, the first generation where items were part of Pokemon, leftovers were by far the best item and almost everything runs it. The Gen 2 metagame would be completely turned on its head by an item clause, but as games continued and added more great items, it's becoming less and less of a big deal. In Scarlet and Violet Overused, the item clause would be an occasionally irritating but mostly insignificant rule for the vast majority of teams. Not all teams, though. The big winner of the item clause being added to singles would likely be hazard stack teams. Since your opponent is only allowed one Pokemon with heavy-duty boots, hazard stacking would be much more consistent than before. Apart from just that one Pokemon, everything will be taking damage from your hazards. Especially with Generation 9 introducing hazard stackers like Hisuian Samurott and Ting Lu, and defog blocking from Gholdengo, it's not hard to see how hazard stack could get a bit out of control. Even this buff probably wouldn't be huge though. The metagame would adapt. Pokemon that are naturally good against hazards, like Landorus, Gliscor, Corviknight, and Clefable, would become more popular. Solid hazard control would also be more popular now that using boots isn't an option. Cinderace and Hatterene usage would likely rise for Court Change and Magic Bounce respectively. It should also be noted that hazard stack teams themselves will lose the ability to spam heavy-duty boots, which is another small nerf to consider. The metagame would adjust, and hazard stack teams would likely be only slightly better than they are now. Sticky web teams would also likely be slightly buffed for the same reason, only having to worry about one Pokemon with heavy-duty boots on the other side is nice. Although sticky web teams are often guilty of spamming booster energy, so they may end up breaking even on the pros and cons of the item clause. The next most affected archetype is probably Hyper Offense, due to how common it is to use multiple booster energies. This would limit Hyper Offense team building somewhat, but it wouldn't be all that difficult to adapt. Plenty of powerful sweepers don't use booster energy, and many successful Hyper Offense teams have topped ladder and gotten big tournament wins just using 1 or even 0 booster energies. I should also mention stall teams. Early in Scarlet and Violet overused, stall teams would typically run 4 or 5 Pokemon with heavy-duty boots. Nowadays, stall teams lean more toward using items like Rocky Helmet and Leftovers, while counting on removal from Galarian Weezing, Corviknight, and Iron Treads. The heavy-duty boots spam stall teams are still around, but not nearly as popular as they were. These teams would obviously be completely obliterated by the item clause, but they've mostly been wiped out already by metagame development. Modern stall teams still do use a lot of leftovers though, so an item clause would be an inconvenience for sure, but not a major one. Gliscor, a stall staple, uses Toxic Orb, which nothing else wants to run. One Pokemon gets leftovers, one gets a Rocky Helmet, one gets heavy-duty boots, and that's 4 items. Most stall teams would certainly like to use leftovers in the last 2 slots, but resist berries are solid choices, and despite interacting poorly with Terra, Black Sludge is also an option for poison types. Stall teams could also sub out the stall staple Blissey for Chansey, which uses an Eviolite, an item nothing else on stall wants to use. Ultimately, adding an item clause would be a nerf to stall, but definitely not a big one. All other major archetypes, like semi-stall, balance, and offense, generally have no problem with item variety. Despite no archetypes having sweeping issues with the item clause, a lot of team ideas would be dead on arrival. If you have a core in mind that involves 2 Choice Band or 2 Choice Specs Pokemon wall breaking for each other, that idea is dead. Maybe you want to build a team that uses multiple Focus Sash sweepers paired with really solid hazard removal, but you can't. Maybe you want to build a Dragon Spam team with Swords Dance Garchomp and Dragon Dance Kyurem, but both really want loaded dice. This is probably the biggest problem with implementing an item clause. Even if it wouldn't significantly impact most teams, some cool ideas just wouldn't work. Moving on, the next thing we should discuss is that some Pokemon would get buffed. Not any huge buffs, but any Pokemon that uses an uncommon item will get at least slightly better. Gliscor and Ogerpon Wellspring are the most prominent examples of this. Nothing else that's relevant wants to use a Toxic Orb or a Wellspring Mask. These are already fantastic Pokemon and overused, and the fact that they don't take up a useful item slot would make them even better. Niche Pokemon that use unique items would also get buffed, like Mousehold, which uses Wide Lens to increase the odds of hitting all 10 hits of Population Bomb. Eviolite Porygon 2 and Quick Claw Galarian Slowbro would get buffed for the same reason. Most of this unique item benefit will go to already meta Pokemon like Gliscor and Wellspring, but it helps out some low tiers a little. Another effect we'd see from the item clause is an increased usage of items that are acknowledged as good, but still rarely seen. Things like Eject Button, Custat Berry, Expert Belt, Life Orb, type-specific boosting items like Never Melt Ice, Weakness Policy, and many more would likely see a noticeable bump in usage. An item clause certainly wouldn't make bad items see the light of day. Items like Room Service or the Absorb Bulb are bad and will stay unused, but we will see a more spread out usage in the items that are already considered good. More Ting Lu will use a Custat Berry, Weakness Policy, or Red Card instead of just running leftovers. Dragonite with Terra Blast Flying may run Sharp Beak instead of heavy-duty boots. This is probably the most substantial positive effect that I believe we'd see if we implemented an item clause. there would be a lot more reasons to use uncommon items on common Pokemon. Something else the item clause would probably do is slightly increase the skill ceiling for competitive Pokemon singles. Astute team builders would often be able to discern what items certain Pokemon are holding based on what other Pokemon are on the team and which Pokemon wants a common item more. And once a certain item is revealed, knowing that no other Pokemon on the team has that item can guide decisions and help build a more well-informed game plan. In a game with as much complexity as competitive Pokemon, this small addition of the item clause wouldn't move the needle much, but it does give another avenue for skilled battlers to outplay their opponents. So, in summary, the most notable effects of an item clause to competitive singles would be a slight buff to Hazard Stack, a slight nerf to Hyper Offense, a slight nerf to Stall, a buff for Pokemon that use unusual items, more varied item usage across the board, and a slight increase to the skill ceiling. And a lot of team ideas wouldn't work anymore. So if you have an idea that involves repeating 2 of any item, probably most commonly a choice item, you're out of luck. For some people, this sounds like an overall improvement, but personally, I don't like it. Team building in Scarlet and Violet is difficult enough as it is. Having to account for an item clause would simply destroy some cool ideas and make building harder for everyone. Also, although this is just personal preference, I don't have an issue with booster spam teams or heavy-duty boot spam teams. Neither of these are extremely common or dominant archetypes, and both of these styles have a lot of room for creativity. In most cases, more team styles being viable is a good thing. I don't want to see either of them eliminated. On top of that, you'll notice that every change brought by the item clause would be quite minor. Hazard Stack would get a little better, Stall would get a little worse. It's not like Hazard Stack would get so good that a Goldengo ban would be almost mandatory and wipe Hazard Stack out, or that Stall would become so bad that it's almost never seen. The metagame would be almost exactly the same, just with an added inconvenience that would wreck some team building ideas and make building more of a headache. In the background footage for this video, I used a double Focus Sash Hyper Offense, a double Booster Energy Sticky Web team, and a triple Choice Band team. I think all of these teams are cool and a lot of fun to play, and if there was an item clause, they'd all be illegal. Ultimately, I think an item clause would just limit team building and kill a few team styles without actually improving the metagame in any noticeable way. But let me know what you think. Do you agree with me, or do you think the benefits of an item clause outweigh the costs? Are there any other significant effects of an item clause that you think I forgot to mention? Let me know in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps out a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.